Following the Second World War, a number of war crimes trials took place, in which the perpetrators of the horrors of the conflict were brought to justice. The most high-profile trials took place at Nuremberg, with the remaining members of the Nazi inner circle being presented with evidence of genocide and evil. At Nuremberg, the terrible crimes committed at camps such as Auschwitz, Bergen-Belsen and Ravensbrück were brought to justice, but the trials also sought to punish the main aggressors of the conflict, those men who were responsible for World War II beginning, and those who were involved in the planning and initiation of wars of aggression that resulted in the deaths of millions of civilians and members of the armed forces. These high-up members of the military, in particular, also had blood on their hands for war crimes committed by the Einsatzgruppen and other atrocities conducted by the Wehrmacht. Alfred Jodl was one such man on trial at Nuremberg, and he was very high up in the Wehrmacht, being the Chief of Operations Staff of the German Armed Forces High Command. Throughout the whole of the conflict he remained in this post, and in the final days of the Third Reich he became the Chief of the Armed Forces High Command. He was a man who was deeply involved in the planning of the war, and involved in signing orders which were death sentences for thousands of soldiers. At Nuremberg he was sentenced to death and faced the hangman's noose. So join us today as we look at the vengeful execution of Alfred Jodl, Hitler's Chief of Wehrmacht Operations. Remember as always to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Alfred Josef Ferdinand Jodl was born on the 10th of May 1890 in Bavaria. As a child it's assumed he had a rather normal family life, and he attended a school in which he was linked to the military, and it was clear that Jodl would have a career from this in the army. He was from a rather affluent family, with his uncle being a psychologist at the prestigious University of Vienna, and his younger brother would also go on to become a general in the army. As the First World War broke out, he was pressed into service on the Western Front, serving in a battery unit. He was there at the very start of the conflict, and despite being wounded in action, he was rewarded with the Iron Cross Second Class. Jodl then returned to the front lines, but was transferred in 1917 across to the Eastern Front, and served here but then returned west. He won the Iron Cross First Class, and following the end of the First World War, he remained within the military. After the Treaty of Versailles was signed, Germany was allowed an army of no more than 100,000 soldiers, greatly minimising the strength and numbers of the army. Alfred Jodl was one of the lucky ones remaining as a soldier in the then labelled Reichswehr, and within this he was a greatly respected and well thought of soldier. Alfred Jodl first saw Adolf Hitler in 1923, when his power was virtually nothing. 3 years earlier, Adolf Hitler had become the Nazi Party's leading public speaker and propagandist, and as time went on, he then increased his stranglehold over the Nazi Party, becoming the leader. It was in 1923 when Hitler attempted to take control of Munich and subsequently be declared the President of Germany in the Munich Beer Hall Putsch. Jodl met Hitler before, and he became attracted to the Nazi ideologies and became a staunch supporter. As the 1920s continued and Hitler was released from prison, Jodl continued to help the group gain support, but he also continued his own rise through the ranks of the military. By 1935, he had risen to the rank of Major General. He met with Hitler before the Second World War broke out, and he must have impressed Hitler with his experience in the battlefield. Because of this, he was initially assigned as a commander of the 344th Division after the Anschluss of Austria, in which Austria was absorbed into the German Empire. After this, Jodl was then picked by Hitler to serve as the Chief of Operations Staff for the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, the OKW. The OKW was the High Command of the Armed Forces, and oversaw the Army, Navy and Air Force. As the conflict continued, it had responsibility for the Second World War on all theatres except the fight against the Soviet Union on the Eastern Front. Alfred Jodl found himself as a deputy to the chief of the OKW, Wilhelm Keitel, a man regarded by many as a yes-man for Hitler, and also found himself as the Chief of Operations Staff. He gained this job shortly before the invasion of Poland took place, and he was integral to the planning of the war and different invasions and operations, with Hitler seeing him as competent and effective. The OKW ran military operations on the Western Front, in Italy and in North Africa, but there was a degree of fragmentation between other groups, such as the Luftwaffe, who established their own command. The OKW would be led by Keitel, who reported to Hitler himself throughout the whole of World War II. Alfred Jodl acted as a leader and a chief of staff during the invasions of Norway and Denmark, making key strategic decisions in regards to these specific operations. Throughout the war, Jodl was confident about the German army and was convinced that the Germans would defeat Britain during the Battle for Britain, and believed an invasion would then take place. One of the biggest elements facing Jodl at the Nuremberg Trials after the war was the fact he signed 2 military orders which were against the rules of war, were unjust and were criminal. Firstly, Jodl signed the Commissar Order on the 6th of June 1941, just before the outbreak of Operation Barbarossa. This order stated that any Soviet political commissar identified amongst captured enemy soldiers would be executed instantly. This order stated that all prisoners Bolshevized or influenced by Bolshevism should also be killed. Hitler, who gave the order, wished to rid Europe of communism and Bolshevism, the key enemies of Nazism. He knew when he issued this that it was illegal, but said that any soldier who carried out an execution or killing would be absolved by Hitler's Nazi Party and would not be held accountable. It stated that immediate and severe measures must be taken. They are therefore, when captured in battle, as a matter of routine, to be dispatched by firearms, indicating that they should be shot. The Commissar Order also stated that anyone with a red star with a golden hammer or sickle on the sleeves should be killed, showing the German army how to identify these specific people. Because of the Commissar Order, thousands of Soviet soldiers who should have been listed as prisoners of war and treated with certain allowances were shot dead when they should have been placed under custody. The other order Jodl signed was the Commando Order, signed on the 28th of October 1942. This stated that German armed forces should execute and kill all Allied commandos found in Europe and Africa without trial, if they are in uniform or not, and even if they attempt to surrender. This was allegedly issued by the OKW to combat the fact the Allies were allegedly violating the Geneva Convention, and that commandos had been ordered to kill German prisoners. The secret order was carried out, and said that any commander or officer who refused to carry it out would be punishable under German military law. It resulted in dozens of illegal executions and war crimes. Jodl, signing these orders, virtually signed his own death sentence after the war was over, with both the illegal documents resulting in lots of war crimes. As the conflict continued, he spent time at Wolf's Lair, Hitler's Rastenburg headquarters in East Prussia, and continued to be promoted. During the 20th of July plot to assassinate Hitler, when Klaus von Stauffenberg bombed the Wolf's Lair, Jodl was present in the room when the briefcase bomb went off and was injured, suffering a concussion. As the war turned against the Germans following the Normandy invasion and the Battle of Stalingrad, the enemies of the Nazis pushed the Germans back, and defeat was inevitable for Germany. Hitler, whilst Berlin was crumbling around him, shot himself, but instructions were then carried out, appointing Grand Admiral Karl Donitz as his successor as the President of Germany. It's clear Donitz must have respected Jodl, as when he formed his government in Flensburg, Jodl was there and was awarded the Knight's Cross by Donitz. Jodl probably thought that he had a role in restoring Germany after World War II, and he signed the German surrender on the 7th of May 1945 as a representative of Donitz, and then a week later, when Wilhelm Keitel, his superior, was arrested, Jodl became the chief of the OKW, which was basically pointless with the curtains closing on World War II. Jodl was arrested with the rest of the Flensburg government by the British and was taken to a prisoner of war camp before he was brought to Nuremberg to face war crimes trials. Alfred Jodl was accused of conspiracy to commit crimes against peace, planning, initiating and waging wars of aggression, war crimes and crimes against humanity, all 4 of the charges. He was seen as a high-ranking member of the military, and the charges brought before him specifically related to the 2 illegal orders, the Commissar and the Commando orders, that Jodl signed, saying that those who would be regarded as prisoners of war should be just shot when captured. He was also accused of being complicit in other atrocities, and was presented with evidence about mass shootings of Soviet prisoners of war. He said that the only prisoners shot were those who did not want to walk. More evidence emerged, with him being accused of being involved in the unlawful deportation of Jews and others, and also in ordering executions and being complicit in these. His signature was found on an order that sent Danish citizens and Jews to concentration camps, and this was also used against him. Jodl pleaded not guilty, however was found guilty of all 4 of the charges put forward against him. Because of this, he was sentenced to death and was to be executed in the gymnasium of Nuremberg prison by a botching executioner, John C. Woods. On the 16th of October 1946, these executions were carried out. The Nuremberg executions were noted for not going as straightforwardly as they could have done, as the executioner performed his role poorly. Firstly, the trapdoor was too small, and many who fell through smashed their heads on the side, causing bleeding. Also, John C. Woods did not use the same methods as other executioners, and many executions took a number of minutes for the condemned to be killed, slowly strangling to death. In some cases it took between 14 and 28 minutes for the condemned to die, and John C. Woods was noted for even pulling down on one body as the neck had not been broken, strangling a Nazi to death. Alfred Jodl was the 10th of 11 defendants to be executed, however was executed actually 9th, as Hermann Goering had taken his life the evening before. He was led into the gymnasium and was flanked by US soldiers. Inside the gym was a gallows that had been made to perform the deaths, and Jodl was brought in following Fritz Sauckel's death. He was brought into the room shortly before 10 to 3 a.m. in the morning, and he was led up the stairs of the gallows. He was then handed over to John C. Woods, who then asked him for any last words, and Jodl stated, "My greetings to you, my Germany." The hood was then placed over his head, and he was shuffled over the trapdoor before the door was released, and Jodl plunged straight through it. Judging by the fact that Arthur Sesenquart was executed 9 minutes after Jodl, we can consider that Jodl's execution was one of the more straightforward ones performed that day, with no bleeding being visible on his body or wounds from the trapdoor. Alfred Jodl was incredibly powerful during World War II and was known for being a prominent member of the Nazi High Command. He was a respected military general and leader, and along with Keitel wished to carry out Hitler's demands to invade different lands and build up a huge empire. It was Jodl himself who signed his own death warrant, being complicit in the signing of the Commando and Commissar Orders, and this evidence could not be denied. When he was brought to Nuremberg, the evidence against him was incredibly damning, and later trials would prove that the Commissar Order was carried out with brutality. A further trial carried out the year later sentenced a number of Wehrmacht officers to prison time for shooting Red Army soldiers and POWs. Alfred Jodl was a key instrument in the Nazi war effort, and in Hitler's plans to take different lands and inflict such misery and suffering onto people living there. Once again, thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.